As you take another step forward, you find yourself among the bookcases, noticing the dust. The air is heavy. You take those breaths, really just trying to knock the mildew out. This area isn't someplace that's been too often. It seems that the farther you go into the library, the deeper you go into those descents through the staircases and finding your way through the darkness. Not only does it get heavier, not only does it change you more and more, and as you become more and more a part of the structure around you, but you begin to slow down. Taking maybe even uncomfortable pauses. Just sit in sometimes nothing. Sometimes a lot of hurt. Other times confusion, excitement. You notice that as you keep descending down those stairs and taking different books down off the shelves and taking a glance at them and finding yourself tending to your gardens instead of brushing past them. You're able to stop forcing it. Stop trying to assume what this library is. Trying to find the right book. Trying to find the right stairway to get out of it, right? See yourself out. You're able to actually understand the horrors of it, the beauty of it. That it is just a thing. It is something that is not entirely of your own creation, your own understanding, but it's its own thing, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be what you thought it was, and it doesn't have to be what you're trying to make it into. It can just be, and something similar of an understanding comes to creep on yourself too. You begin to think of that maybe I am not all these things that I'm trying to hold on to. Maybe I do have anxiety. Maybe it wasn't what my parents told me. Maybe I am actually something that deserves to be happy. You know, weird thoughts, right? Weird thoughts.
Yep.
And then you get to hear something. Another voice, right? Something that gets to bring you out of yourself again, right? And actually start moving again. Not just to move and move on to the next thing, but just a friendly little voice saying hello. Just to be
hello.
with. And something that's worthy to show up for again and to experience that joy with. And today, that wonderful companion and that reason to show up today with is none other than Jared, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Tall. I tip my cap to you. Are we ascending up the stairway to heaven today? Or are we deconstructing a deity?
I don't want to get sued by the Led Zeppelin estate, so we're going to be deconstructing a deity, because I don't think that one's been trademarked.
I don't think it has, but I think it's an appropriate setting for today's episode, the third part of my own personal religious deconstruction and religious journey. So, just to recap in my own words, part 1, we covered my foundation of faith, my upbringing, being in a non-denominational Christian household. Everything was sunshine and roses for the most part, and just living amongst society's normal pressures of being a white male in a Christian ethnostate, pretty much. And then in part
that's
2,
that's a simple way of saying it. And you know, I want to acknowledge the fact that America is a little bit more complex than that. But I mean, at the same time, you are dealing with that in the reality of like what it is to like truly deal with the privileged class and what it is to be in that, you know, what was it like in the America in the late 90s, early 2000s, and
Yep.
all you have to do is go back and watch Miss Congeniality to see that culture, and some of the best and some of the
Exactly.
worst.
Exactly. And the thing is, like, yeah, there's pockets where it feels a lot more like a lot more of a rich experience. Like you're much more immersed
Mhm.
in that type of culture rather than maybe other pockets of society where it is a lot more secular in nature, maybe a lot more diverse, a lot more inclusive. But obviously, as time has went on and our generation has grown older and the new generation is coming into their own, like we're starting to see the changes. But back then, yeah, it was definitely still embedded in the fabric of society. So that really was part of my formative years.
It
And
pays
yeah,
to be the in group, right?
yeah,
It
the thing is,
doesn't matter what power dynamic it is, it pays to be the in group.
it does, but it's like it pays, but it pains at the same time.
Well, and not to toot our own horn, and with the intentional meditation there, right? And that was kind of the challenge of it, right? I am a firm believer of in different ways, but it sucks, whatever system of hierarchy that oppresses an whatever group, right? Inherently the oppressors put themselves into a box that sucks too, and that isn't fundamentally what that experience is. And I think that's part of it, like you were saying, of the deconstruction of it all, right?
Yep.
And it sucks to be in that worldview when you're like, oh, this is when you're like, oh, I don't like this. I don't,
Yeah,
I don't agree with this anymore.
exactly. And we kind of explored some of the darker turns, Tall, in part two, the tumultuous transition, if you will, the turbulent transition, where obviously the Great Recession happened, really impacted my family, really fucked me up, obviously, with just what I went through in my transition with my friend circle and feeling like I didn't have anybody in my corner. We were losing everything to kind of landing on our feet somewhat, but not where we were. And having Christianity almost like be a crutch to get through some of those years. Now we kind of pick up again here, part three, where we're coming out of that storm, that dark storm, and I start to see the light.
Well, I mean, because yeah, and I want to again humanize this moment here, traveler, right? I want to simply say that this is, a child that watched their home get repossessed, right? This is a child that watched their family's income completely get dried up, and went from this strange transition for where religion was this kind of guiding factor in life, and
Yeah,
is who we are, into like this pretty traumatic moments that you had with your family, right? Let's be
yeah,
honest about that. Between I won't go, you're gonna have to listen to part two to really get
yeah,
into the details of it, but especially between you and your mom, right?
yeah.
And especially the difference between how you react to that and your dad, right? And some
Hmm.
of those different dichotomies, and like this is it to your story, right? There you went through a point in your life where you didn't have the agencies to support yourself, and your family lost everything because
Yeah.
of conditions outside of your immediate control, and that affected millions of other Americans, right, and
Hmm.
the entire world. And like so many other things, you found your family, at least initially, found its pathway forward through clamping down on what it saw as the holy system of the world, right? And
Yeah.
Christianity. And really found that community and sense of attempted resiliency through that.
Hmm. Tall, what the final nail in the coffin was for my childhood. I don't know if I really told this to that many people, but it was probably when my mom made me sell a lot of my old Nintendo 64 games and GameCube games, like
Tell
my
me about
Mario
this.
games and stuff. That was hard, right? It was like just watching a piece of you die
Yeah,
almost
that sucks.
because I think in the moment she kind of convinced me like, okay, I'm growing up, don't play video games anymore really. But obviously as we get older, we realize like, oh, that's just who we are. Like our generation is different than Gen X. Like Gen X, sure, they grew up playing Galaga and Pac-Man and stuff, and then they got older, they grew out of it. But our generation treats video games very differently. They're timeless to us. So I remember like it pained me a little bit to get rid of those, and then I got back into video games not too long after that, like later in high school, again as I started to come through my own transition, right, and I started to find my happiness again, and I kind of started to go on a journey where I started to reacquire these games, and then I get the Wii. I know this is a side tangent, but I get the Wii and I get the Virtual Console, and over years I basically buy all the games I used to love again, and I found some new ones, and I beat them, and it was just great. But that kind of also was one moment that kind of symbolized the demarcation. Again, nothing is ever going to be like never seeing those cartridges again, right? Those cartridges. And I think for me, I'm really glad that I hung on to the N64 itself, because that is timeless. I don't care if it's not working anymore at all. That is like one of the only things I will never part with in my life. It's a relic. I want to show my kids. If my kids have kids, I want to show them. It's timeless, because I feel like sometimes I see people that had things in the past and they didn't hold on to it. And I'm like, but why? Like that was fucking cool. Like, keep it, cherish it. So
Now, as someone who didn't go through did the stupid choice, I should say, of when they were whacked out on methamphetamine to give away all their Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards and all their video games to different people and to different Goodwills, and to literally give their entire childhood away. I can understand losing the trauma of your childhood stuff just through a different lens, right? So I get how much that sucks, and it really is, like, honestly, a transition period when you look back on your life and you're like, oh, this was clearly a boundary of mine and I just didn't realize it at the time that it was happening. And I really respect your journey that you have intentionally gone through to go to get that back. It's something that, we've talked about, in our own private and everything like that, and just what video games mean to us. I mean, for Christ's sake, you know what my left arm has a tattoo of,
Let me say this. I think that what kind of got me out of high school, and it was actually a factor in getting my happiness back, was The Legend of Zelda. That
Yeah.
was one thing that really kind of got me out of some of the darkness, like discovering this amazing franchise. And I'm like, how did I never like play this before? And again, one of many factors. I'm not going to give Zelda all the credit here, but it definitely played a part, just finding those like little moments to escape in Hyrule.
No, you found a place to go to that you're connected to, right? And I mean, I understand that video games can serve that. I mean, my favorite video game still to this day is Stardew Valley, right? Because I just could be a happy little
Yep.
farmer and like enjoy this weird little community, and I get to have blue chickens, right? It's a good time.
That's great.
And I think that, we're talking about some of the paths of your survival here, right? And now we're getting into some of these chapters where you started actually figuring out Jared. What is Jared? And, I'm not Jared, so I'm going to go ahead and do my best to be quiet here for a moment and let you start, letting us hear about these transition periods for Jared.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, where did we leave off? So last episode, we talked about me getting baptized and how that was an episode of cognitive dissonance for me, that I felt accepted as part of this community, and it kind of felt like climbing the mountain with my parents, and it was such a great feeling, a positive feeling, just getting out of that darkness finally. But at the same time, I always had my doubts with Christianity. I still, like, I never believed in what was in the Bible. I really had a hard time believing in the supernatural. So it kind of, I think after the baptism, it kind of settled. Go ahead.
So for usually always struggling to believe in the supernatural, then what was the baptism for you, actually? Real quick, I think that's something I'd really be interested in knowing a little bit more.
I think for me, it was more symbolism for me. It was more symbolic. I think getting the baptism was more of saying, you fucking did this. You went to church, you gave it a try, you became a part of this little community. You got through some of these darker times. You climbed the mountain with your parents, and I think I just partook in it because it was more of a symbolic thing. Like, okay, this is its own demarcation, and I feel like almost like getting baptized was almost like a graduation for me. I felt like graduating from like all of the twists and turns that I had taken over the previous who knows how many years, right? So, but I think it was truly symbolic, and it didn't have like a it didn't have a supernatural meaning to me, right? Like it was more, I guess, spiritual and like cleansing in a way, just because of what I had been through, but not in a way that I felt like closer to the Holy Spirit or Jesus or God or anything. I think I tried to think that, but then in hindsight, it's like, no, I didn't feel any different than I did before, right? So it was good, but again, immediately after that, almost like it felt like things kind of just simmered down. Like life kind of went back to normal. I stopped really going to church, and I had more time to
Interesting.
really freely think. So
No, I think that's really interesting that, like, because I am someone who, I wish I just, I'm someone who, like, halfway wishes, like, I sensuously was abducted by Bigfoot and aliens, right? Just to be able to have that paranormal experience or to see a ghost, like, just, come on, let's fucking go with it, right? And so I didn't get bar mitzvahed myself, right? And it wasn't because of any paranormal reason or being able to have that sacred region or anything like that, especially growing up with Jewish and kind of a different interpretation of what the sacred is.
mhm,
Um, it's really interesting to me, as somebody you went through an adult baptism, right? And for it to really just be that achievement of community, right? And really
yeah,
to have that kind of perspective on it of being more of like this social demarcation rather than any kind of spiritual fulfillment. And I think that is just something that, is interesting to think about in I get a dichotomy, right?
yeah,
And, in that to have your I think that's just really important, right? Is that like, and I think that's something that's really relatable to a lot of people, like just being part of this community and like wanting to be, without even having maybe these charismatic or fantastical experiences, right? It's not like
hmm
you're having snakes being whipped around and you're getting caught in the charisma of it all, having an out of body
yeah,
experience. No, you're just part of this
yeah,
community, right? And I
yeah,
think that really is a lot more human in a lot of ways instead of having this grand, like, oh no, I'm out of body with Christ right now and I've now been baptized under the waters. Hallelujah. I see the Holy Mary, right?
hmm
I think that's just I think that's a lot more human,
yeah.
honestly. And I think that it's really relatable of being like, no, I just like did this community thing and now I'm a part of like this group.
I agree. And again, it was a personal journey for me, Tall, and I think that there was a spiritual component that was personal, but not like religious in the Christian sense, right? Like it
Yeah.
felt like me going through this felt cleansing for my spirit, but not in a way that I felt connected to like Holy Trinity in any sort of way.
Yeah.
It's something, like I said,
Interesting.
I wanted to try to believe in, but again, I've just always had those doubts in the back of my mind, and I think that that's really kind of what bubbled up, and what we'll talk about throughout this episode, because I kind of view my skepticism of the Christian faith and everything like that in kind of the same sense that you would view like a hotspot. It kind of lays dormant for a long time, kind of shows some signs of bubbling up from time to time, and then it just explodes. And you're like, wow, this is it. Like, I finally relieved all that cognitive dissonance and that like pressure inside my mind to awaken, to fully awaken. And that's not, again, that's not me trying to shame on people that do believe in Christianity. I think that you follow your truth, and as long as you're not obstructing other people from finding their truth, that's all fine by me. Just respect others and all that. But again, for me, it just felt like there was always something more. I had climbed the mountain, I got the baptism, but even immediately after, like I said, I think because I still felt disconnected from the religion, I thought I was really going to feel something after going through all these church services and listening to the gospel and trying to read the Bible and all that stuff, getting baptized. I think I genuinely had convinced myself, Tall, that I was going to start to feel, and I just never felt. It just never, there was never that spark. I think that that's kind of when I started to really lose my faith in Christianity. Is like, I'm like, oh, like I did all these things and I didn't feel closer to this sky god. I didn't feel closer to Jesus, or I didn't feel like a Holy Spirit in me. Like I said, it was a personal journey for me, but I still felt like devoid of that.
I think that's really interesting. I think that is really interesting because you went through this moment where you're supposed to have this spiritual high and this quite literally charismatic exuberation of it, right? And still left you, like you said, not connected to whatever that ultimate reality was for you. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can internalize something like that, right? And I think that
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to understand, like, that is why it sucks to be a part of a group that is in power and that doesn't have
Mhm.
like this best interest of all its community members into identity or something like that, or into that personal relationship, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a personal journey you're on, right? And trying to be like, what is this thing? And I think there's a couple different ways that can go, and ultimately we'll hear how your story goes. But like, I think that's a huge disconnect, as you're obviously pointing out, right? To go through this religious experience where you're supposed to have like this waverness. And I think that, like, I think again, it speaks to the humanity of it, right? I think that it speaks to, like, a lot of religious stories, even of the person who's wavering, right? And
Yeah.
it speaks to just the realistic truth of, like, this isn't magic. When I sit here and you dunk my head
Yeah.
in water, you just dunk my head in water.
Yeah.
Like, when I
Exactly.
when I drink this wine, I can understand the symbology and everything like this. But
Mhm.
are you telling me it actually transfigures into the blood of Christ?
Exactly.
It's just interesting
Exactly.
concept, it's just interesting concepts, right? And it's just a different point of view of, like, where you determine your basis
Yeah.
of reality, right? Quite literally, right? And
Yeah.
it's talking about a disconnect of, I'm not trying to say that maybe Christianity isn't the correct way, right? We're here to be open to whatever individual pathway is, right? But, like, it's the saying that, like, and I think you're talking about a really important disconnect of, like, the way that you were taught Christianity versus how you understood the world worked, disconnected. And even when going through that religious experience, you're still like, "Mm." And I think it's so interesting how long you committed yourself to still going through to try and figure out how far that truth would go, right? And I think that's really important too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And after the baptism, like I said, things kind of settled down. I kind of had another milestone of mine, which was graduating high school. That was a big milestone. I had went through most of high school as a successful student, and obviously I had my ups and downs in my social circle and my mental health, but senior year really, I had a huge case of senioritis. I did not care anymore, but luckily I coasted to the finish, and I was so proud of myself for, again, kind of getting through another type of journey, an educational journey, and getting to walk across that stage, get my high school diploma, go out to Longhorn Steakhouse after, celebrate
Hmm.
graduation. That was a lot of fun. Get to see family and kind of have them all revel in my success. That was intoxicating. I'll tell you that much. That was very, very much intoxicating. And that, again, really put a cap on my, like, childhood. That really was the final chapter in my adolescence that now I'm turning into an adult. Like, I was 18, just graduated high school. Shit's about to get real. I start looking for jobs, not really super successful at first, looking at colleges, universities. I did get in to Arizona State University. Was very excited about that. I declined offers to go elsewhere, and I wanted to stay home. I wanted to stay local, wanted to stay with my parents. And we were about to embark on a journey of our own. As the three of us, we had actually bounced around for the next, I'd say, 4 or 5 years in three different apartments through my final years of living at home. So we moved out of the house that we had lived in, and then we moved up far, not super far, but farther north of campus. And then we didn't like that situation at all. It did not turn out well for us. It was just very much like a party atmosphere type of apartment. Not something I'd recommend. I'm not going to name drop or anything, but There's some very wild experiences there, like someone kicking a basketball at the sprinkler and flooding the entire basketball court that I used to love going down to. And just not great engineering. Like all of the like exterior was glass and pretty much allowed so much sunlight to get in that it basically cooked you on the inside. Wasn't great. And the washing the washer and dryer definitely sounded like a Boeing 737 like taking off. So
Lift off.
yeah, lift off. So we got out of there. We moved closer to where I grew up, and we stayed for most of my college years at two apartments in that area. And yeah, started college, started at Arizona State University. This was another big step in my journey. I thought I was going to be an architect. I thought that's what I was going to be. I had dreams of being an architect since I grew up with, as we talked about in the previous episode, like my parents being in real estate and getting to see like floor plans and schematics and study the architecture of different buildings. I did a photography class in high school and I took pictures of different buildings as part of my project. And I just had a vested interest in that type of design. Now, come to find out later in my adult life, I actually was more of a fan of urban planning and development, but I digress. Again, I thought I was going to be an architecture major, and let's just say that that dream quickly derailed. As no joke, my first studio class for architecture, I walked out of that class and I never went back. Like, I just, it was such a mismatch, dog. It was like, I'm like, I don't belong here. And you know, I'm not the most decisive person. I just felt it in my bones. I do not belong here. This is not for me. This is not going to work out. I went through with my design class. That was pretty cool, and some other classes, but yeah, first semester was not a success. I also had a calculus for engineers class that I failed because I quite literally forgot that I had an exam. I thought it was on like a Tuesday, or I thought it was on a Thursday, and it was actually on a Tuesday. So completely missed the exam. I knew that there was like no looking back at that point, and I was like, all right, let's get back on the horse. Semester 2, I go back to my parents and I say, hey, like, what am I gonna do? I'm not gonna be an architect anymore. What else could I do? And my mom's like, oh, you've always been great at math. You should be like an actuary or do like statistics. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Didn't really that didn't really pan out either. Unfortunately, I got into the second semester, the spring. Statistics class went okay. I took a Java programming class. That was horrible. Again, just I'm not a coder by any means. I understand it to get by. Did not connect to that at all. But you know, like I said, I took some other classes. I was doing pretty well for the most part. In calculus for engineers, I was taking again because I was like, hey, look, I gotta right this ship. Like, I didn't want to have that failure sitting in my record. And not to mention, through all this tall, I was on a full ride scholarship to Arizona State. And that was something that I had to keep a certain GPA, keep that. And I actually talked about it before, this particular experience, when I think we did a series on me, like maybe like 5 years ago or so. So if you go back and listen to that, I go into more detail there. But basically, long story short, I made the same fucking mistake with this calculus for engineers class again. I missed another exam and I had to drop out. I had to do a complete withdrawal. None of the credits could count. And I had to do that because if I finished the semester and I failed that class again, I would not be able to retake it. So I was left with that was the only
5
option.
years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, good call out, by the way. No, and you were I remember 100% you were at that point of desperation, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Jared.
Yeah.
We talked about this 5 years ago. Now that you prove it, when we talked about it in the Going Out West, Going Out West, Going Out Wheat series.
Yep.
And then I believe that was culminated with Coming Home. So this is a continuation after 5 years in the making. That is a good call out. And I do remember you talking about in that what that initial emotional experience was when you had that conversation with your parents specifically. That's where I want to hone into, because that's what I remember from our original conversation on that. And now that you are 5 years removed from that point of where our initial conversation was and the reflection is on that now, I want you to take me back to that conversation where you did have that where you're exactly you're leading to. I want to hear where your reflection is, thinking about Jared's space in that time. Where give me like where Jared was and where you think the biggest differences are now.
Yeah, well, here's something really ironic. We talked about this 5 years ago, and when we talked about it 5 years ago, that had happened 5 years ago. So actually, it's really eerie that we're coming up on a decade, because I actually did the complete withdrawal at the end of April 2014. So it's almost been a decade since I did the complete withdrawal, and I lost my scholarship. And
lost the
I have to tell you,
lost the scholarship.
No,
I'm not done dancing, because I did this too. I went through this all the same process, and the fact that you, this smart ass person that I know, went through the same process with me, solidarity.
So it's funny, like, did we kind of hit rock bottom at the same time?
Well, I mean, you didn't do math, so I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
For all intents and purposes, right? Because
for all intents and purposes, we both went to that first semester. I made it to literally one class in my biology class. I made it to two of my religious studies class, and I was just like, fuck. And then I did the same thing as you. I did the withdrawal. I went online and I tried to go into a sustainability thing, and it just wasn't there for me at that point. And I remember taking online classes in Vegas at one point with my grandparents, and by that April, I was no longer inactive. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I was. Yeah, we had a similar trajectory. We just took to two different little pathways to get there.
What's really funny is we weren't communicating at that time because we weren't friends
yet. Yeah, we thought each other were assholes and each other's fucking from high school.
Yeah, but look at us now, right? Look at us now.
Now, I'm a princess and you're a prince.
Oh, who would have thought? Not me.
Not me.
Shout out to Paul Rudd.
It's my favorite meme. It's like one of my top. It's the top 3 of favorite meme.
Look at us. Who would have thought?
Look at us. Not I.
That's great. But yeah, I mean, getting back to the whole scholarship thing, it was truly rock bottom for me. It truly was. I'm not going to go as super into detail as I did during the Going Out West, Going Out East series. But yeah, I mean, pretty much I came home and I remember I was just bawling my eyes out, of course, because I'm a man that's very in tune with my emotions, and I wasn't afraid to wear that because I felt like a fucking failure. And it was something that, looking back on it now, I know it sounds weird to say this, I'm proud of it. I'm proud that I went through that, because I feel like it's something special it's one thing to be molded by trauma and then overcome it, but then it's another thing to make a giant fucking mistake and then be able to rise from that and become something that was even better than you thought you could have been. And I'll kind of talk about as we move forward in this episode here how I got to that point, but in hindsight, like, I'm proud of that journey. I'm proud of just having the awareness to set myself up for success, because I gotta tell you, that withdrawal is what saved my ass. That withdrawal is what allowed me to go back to school and later finish what I started successfully. And it proved to me that I'm not like immune to failure, that despite being told like I'm smart and I have all these innate capabilities, like, you still got to put the work in. You still got to want it. And I think I had that self-awareness moment where I'm like, this is just not working. It's not working because I'm not mentally there. I was not ready. I felt like the transition from high school senioritis, senior year Jared, to first year, freshman year of university, it just did not work. It was not working. And I realized that I just needed to hit the reset button and focus on me. And that's what I did. I think after that withdrawal, I I took some time to myself. I literally, from May to October, I mean, I looked for jobs, but I wasn't really getting any traction. And like it was kind of just fun to hang out with friends and just be me and just be a young adult and
Live.
just live. Yeah, I felt free. For the first time in my life, I truly felt free. I had no obligations, no responsibilities. My parents took care of me, living at an apartment. Again, our lifestyle, as you notice throughout the series, is gradually downgraded, not in quality, but just, again, downsizing and downsizing to the point of being an apartment. But we were stable. We were getting by, and I was proud of my parents for pivoting when they needed to keep us afloat. And being free was really great because it got me to get the perspective that I needed. It got me to refocus on myself, and it got me to rebuild my social network that I desperately needed. As you know, I got a retail job and I met a lot of people at that job. And I built this really strong, robust network of friends. And that included yourself and still does include yourself, right? Like 2015 was one of the best years of my life because I met you and I met so many wonderful people. Um, some of which, a few like yourself, that I'm so close to that I consider family. And I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity that was given to me to rise from the ashes, build that social network, find my people. That was such an immense part of my growth here post scholarship. And you know what was another thing is tapping into my curiosity. And that's another big part of my religious deconstruction. What got me to start to turn away from faith is, remember in part one, I alluded to my interest in the Discovery Channel, the Science Channel, kind of staying up past my bedtime when I was just a little kid watching these theories about how the moon was created by a collision of Earth and Theia, or evolution, or all these different concepts, the Big Bang, cosmology. And I start to rediscover it in my own way. YouTube, which through most of high school and middle school was kind of just for memes and YouTube poops and Rick rolls and machinima and all that stuff, like watching video games and things like that. I started to really turn my attention during these years where I was building my social network and out of school. I started to realize, like, okay, I'm still craving learning, right? Like, that's the part that I missed about school. Like, I love learning. I love being educated. And I think that there's part of me that I'm like, yeah, I fucked up school. I wasn't ready, but I still want to learn. I'm still curious. And that's when I really started my journey with science YouTube. And I started to find science communicators that kind of reinvigorated and reignited my interest in science. And think of creators like Vsauce and some other science creators at the time that, again, really just started to pique my interest and started to pique my curiosity. And now today, I can't even tell you how many science YouTubers and podcasters I follow, and just always keeping up to date with like the latest news and events and things like that. Like it was another big turning point for me. So I would say 2014 going to 2015, the rebound from the trauma of losing my scholarship, making this golden mistake, it turned into an opportunity where I started to work, started to build my experience contributing to society, built my social network, which really supported me, and I felt the best, most positive mental health to that point in my life. And then also following my curiosity in science and learning about the world around me and starting to question, like, wait, like, maybe I'm going back to square one again. Maybe this foundation of faith fractured and re-solidified somewhat, but was malleable. Maybe now it's just crumbling. Maybe now it's turning to dust because I'm starting to once again question my reality and starting to see the world in a different light.
I think what's really interesting, right, is coming into this time period in your life, right? I never associated you really as heavily Christian, even, right? Even by that point in
Oh,
2014. I met you probably, I think we reconnected in, that would have been the fall of 2014, I believe.
I thought it was January of 15. Maybe it
Around
was
that
just
time
before
period,
that,
because
but it was
it
around
would
that
have
time.
been, yeah, yeah,
It
it
was
might,
cold.
exactly. Right around there, because it would have been right about that time I first connected with our mutual friend at that point, right during my amends process, right? That really got us to eventually at that oregano's.
Yep,
Um,
that's right.
uh,
Shout out.
and
Gotta
shout
go
out
back
those
there
waffle
sometime.
fries. Shout out to those waffle fries.
And the
Um,
Pizookie and the Alfredo the Dark.
and that's something that I recognize. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, that was the meal. And I think what was really important to recognize at this point is you were already at a stage in your journey where I was already coming out from a very radical spiritual perspective, because I was still coming off of the delusions that I was of in within my active addiction to possession meth. Not that I'm in any delusions now, traveler. I'm totally sane and rational now, and it's totally got it all figured out. And there's nothing. I don't have any more deconstructing to do. I got it. I'm good, right? No, that's not how that works. Um,
We're always deconstructing, Tall.
always
I'm
deconstructing,
still
right? Always be,
deconstructing.
yeah, exactly. That's the buzzword of it now, right? But I
Mhm.
do really do enjoy it. I think it's a really good way to really have analysis over it, right? Um, you were always someone who like or instantly engaged with me in that stuff, right? We always had the space of already trying to figure out like this more macro spiritual aspect to it, right? And we flirted with being red pilled and black pilled with that, right? You know, we had
Yeah.
fun with our spirit science stuff. We went down, plenty of
Mhm.
these different rabbit holes in our different thought experiences, especially when we were in our
Yep.
reunion days, right? Um,
Yeah.
and there was a lot to that, and there was a lot to that experiments, right? And of these thought experiments we went to, and it was always came back to a place of trying to be kind, though, right? And again, that's ultimately why I really resonated with you, and I think we formed the connections we have is because it was always trying to show up for that, right? And like
Mhm.
be decent, right? Um, what was I think is really important to understanding is like I never associated you as someone who lost faith. I never always associated you as someone who was a searching of your own individual truth, right? And it's funny because I interacted with your family, and they variously understood a very heavy Christian undertone with some of the dynamics that happened there.
Yep.
Um, your mom's one of the only people I pray with, and I don't mean that in any kind of shame way. I mean that very like sacredly. Like it was an honor
Mhm.
to pray with your mom, and some of the times I prayed with them.
Mhm.
I think that your mom, I know you went through some a little bit more graphic experiences with them, but I've enjoyed their expression of faith quite a bit, because I've just been able to be on the surface, in passing with them, and I think that they have a
Of course.
pretty, I do think they have a beautiful relationship with their spirituality, right?
Oh,
I
they
think
do.
it's pretty intense,
Mhm.
and to have at least always this connection with you, right? And especially because I think you kind of had this a little bit with my Jewish history too, and everything like that too, of like this just place of just trying to come of like, what is this stuff, and like, what is, is there something that's really esoteric to it, or is it really banal, right? Is it some
Yep.
paranormal experience, or is it something a little bit more mundane, right? And I think that that's not changed in the past 10 years. And I think it's only evolved. And I think that it's only evolved as you've taken the time to figure out your identities and like what you want to pursue for your interests and everything like that, and being able to honestly communicate it, right? And in coming back on 5 years of a check-in, I guess we'll check in another 5 years, traveler.
Yeah. We should.
Um, yeah, seriously. I
Yeah.
think it's a really important, recollection of like you saying, like that moment was a mistake and you made mistakes. Ultimately in your life, it wasn't a mistake though, right? And I think that's what they say when time heals all wounds and all that and mumbo jumbo and everything like that. But realistically, you're able
Mhm.
to, like you said, go back into yourself and give yourself this compassion and a little bit of grace for Jared at that time, and to understand that Jared was just trying to figure out what the fuck's going on.
Yep.
And I think that, that's important, and why is that important is because it led you to here right now, into sitting in this moment 5 years later, being able to be like, I'm proud of Jared. Like,
Yep.
that's good. Being proud of Jared from 10 years ago, fuck yeah, dude.
Why, thank you, Tall. I have to say it's quite beautiful being at a stage where now you can offer your perspective on my deconstruction, because now you're in my life. As of late 2014, early 2015, whenever it happened, we didn't mark a date
It
down or
was
anything
cold.
in the
It was
calendar. It
definitely
was
cold.
cold. It was fucking
I
cold.
remember it was cold. Because the
Yeah,
holiday lights were still up one way or another.
yeah, it was cold. So
because I do remember that the lights in the Ahwatukee foothills area, the center of things were still up because I remember driving, in that time period, like with that
Mhm.
and everything like that. So it would right have been it might have been early January, right around the holidays. You're right.
Yeah. And a big shout out to Zach for connecting us as well. He may never listen to this, but a huge shout out there.
No, I mean seriously, it's the funniest little connections that tie these all things together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was this stage that I think you really hit the nail on the head, Tall. Like, I was so curious. And I think, yeah, we came at it from different lenses. You came more from the spiritual side, and I came more from the science side, but we kind of tapped into the curiosities with each other. Like, I think that I've always had innate spiritual curiosities, and I know that you've always had innate scientific curiosities. So when we kind of came together, we were able to be like a think tank. And I remember one of the first conversations we had was about those transitional species coming out of
Yeah,
the water on the ancient earth, and what those like swamplands must have been like and everything. And that was just such a fun conversation. And I didn't want Zach to feel like a third wheel, but I was like, we got to hang out. We got to talk more. And we had so many times where we would go to Chipotle or hang out at the hot tub and just talk for hours about these things. And that's what really made us so special, because we had those curiosities. And I don't think that either one of us really knew how to approach it yet. Like, we're still finding our way, right? Like, we were susceptible to going down
we were
those dangerous
babies.
rabbit holes. We were malleable in the nicest way, and we were just curious. We just wanted to learn more about the world around us, and I think that curiosity again is what propelled me to become a man of science. It was definitely a big component of that, and I do acknowledge that you never saw me as a man of faith, and that's completely understandable. I think from the outside, I don't think many people would have considered me that at maybe any point in my life. But I think when I say I lost faith, Tall, I think that what I mean by that is I was losing the concept of faith. Like, I don't think that I ever had faith in God the way that my parents did. But I think that I was always trying to hold on to that. I was trying to always hold on to Christianity. I was trying to find the value in prayer. I was trying to just figure it out. And as time went on, I started to let that go because I just didn't see merit in it. Like I said, I started to explore science, and I started to explore my spirituality when we had those conversations. And you know what I fucking learned is that spirituality does not come from a religion. Spirituality is inherent to yourself, like the experience I had at the baptism, and like those ethereal moments where you feel that metaphorical high and you just accomplish something. You just climb that mountain, whether it's physical or mental, right? Like, I learned that, yes, I know it's a cheeky phrase, but you can truly be spiritual without being tied to a religion and adhering to religious dogma. And I think that that was what I really followed, because I realized that I didn't believe in religion, but I still had a point, or I still had a part of me that wanted to have that spirituality and acknowledge that while I was a man of science, and I started to grow in that way, that there was always the unknowns in the universe, and I still wanted to kind of leave things up to interpretation. So I think that
Well,
that was a fun part of it.
I think that's something that I really actually want to spend probably our last little for 15 minutes here or so talking about. Actually, is exactly that.
Yep.
Is I never saw you as someone not of a person of faith because I was right there seeking with you, buddy. And
Hmm.
I do want to point that point of clarification in there. Is I was asking those questions right there with you. I never saw you as a Christian. Um, I never saw you as explicitly that, right? I saw it as a baseline understanding for maybe how you operated and the perspective you were coming from. But the conversations we were having, right, is just something that was in a different place. And because I wasn't at this junction and this close in your life, right, like I wasn't privy to these more
Hmm.
internal struggles that you were going through, and this, deconstruction internally, and this of I'm not even going to use deconstruction in that term. I'm going to just say disconnect that you were having
Yeah.
between how you perceive the world and Christianity at that time, right?
I was still
And
wrestling
so,
with it.
And exactly, and instantly we started off on a bat that was just trying to ask those questions of what is it, what is the big IT, what is the capital T truth, right?
Yes.
And that was our baseline. And I really think that you put yourself in a position, right, where you was thinking about like you were ready instantly to once you started taking the time to really stop back and work for yourself, you were able to start instantly running with what is that big T truth questions in yourself. And I think that's really cool. And I want to really examine that.
Yeah.
Because you talked about all this time and effort prior to that to becoming baptized, to converting to a community, and to becoming that. And then finally, you know, within the 6 months to a year of the biggest mistake of your life up to this point, where you've gone through now the biggest trauma that you have individually caused yourself, not from life, but because of your actions.
Yeah.
You
Bigger than
were
the
able
friend circle
to,
change.
correct, after 18 years essentially of life, you were able now to go through all of that, and then within finally, you know, taking the time to stop in your way and actually not do what the system was telling you to, not follow the good path of, you know, and everything like that, and follow the good word, if you will, and the American corporate system, and you were able to slow down and listen to yourself.
Yep.
That's when you were able to finally find those like keys that like, and you were able to in your journey. So tell me about that. Talk to me about like what that slow down meant to you and like what it looked like.
Oh, it truly meant the world, Tall. I mean, again, after I went through that big mistake of losing my scholarship, I did slowly start to put things back together piece by piece. I started to, like I said, I started to work, I started to build my social network, I started to explore my scientific and spiritual curiosities, and started to forget about the boundaries of this Christian institution because I kind of push off to the side because I'm like, well, it's not really relevant to me right now. Of course, I'd
So it was a
engage with the
natural kind
discourse.
of like just transition for you at that point. Like it was
Yeah.
just like you really just kind of, it wasn't just like the, oh, all of a sudden you find yourself, oh, I'm just working and all these things like that. It was like this ability for you to really just be like, oh, you know, I am not okay with these things, so I'm going to actively start pursuing other things. And it was kind of just like
Yeah.
this active like effort.
Yeah, it was so naturally alluring to me. I think again, it's the same thing that I talked about with the architecture class, right, Tall? Like, I immediately knew that it wasn't right for me, and I left. And I started to develop this sense of who I was and this sense of identity. It started to become me, and that's something that I never had before, right? Like, somebody was always telling me who I was, and I started to fucking say, no, this is who I am. And years ago, I could have stood up to Christianity, right? But I didn't because I was like, look, I was just a kid, just following in my parents' footsteps, trying to learn the Word of God, trying to be a good person, trying to think that that was the light and that I just wasn't enlightened enough. I just wasn't educated enough. I needed to learn more. I needed to go to church more. I needed to pray more, all these things. And I just finally realized that that was all bullshit. It was just all just recycled bullshit that we tell ourselves to try to convince ourselves that this is the truth when you know in your heart that it's not, that it's not the truth. And I really started to go through that transition where when I realized how easy it was to let Christianity go and explore these more alluring options, that's when I really started to teeter on the side of, well, maybe I need to walk it back. Slowly, I started to deconstruct my faith to where I didn't believe in interpretations of the Bible, which I mean, I was always skeptical about it, but now I was like outright a skeptic. And then I started to dislike the idea of going to church except for holidays, just to again kind of appease my parents at the time. I slowly started to walk it back, but then like I was still trying to hang on to this spiritual mindset. So I'm like, okay, I'm starting to ask myself the questions like, do I believe in a God? Do I believe in like a Holy Spirit and all these things? Or do I kind of believe in my own interpretation of a higher power and spirituality? And those are kind of the questions that I started to wrangle with in my mind. But I think there's actually a great meme that encapsulates this stage of my life. If you've seen the meme, Tall, where like the guy's with the girl and is looking back and checking out another girl, and the girl he's with is like appalled.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes, I
I
have.
feel like the girl that's appalled is Christianity, and the girl I'm looking at is science, and
Yeah.
in my own personal spiritual journey. And it was just, it's like it was so attractive to me that I was just ready to leave it all behind, right? And slowly but surely I deconstructed, but it took some time, like it wasn't a transition where just overnight I'm like, okay, not a Christian anymore. I slowly started to disassociate. Piece by piece, I would just kind of start to take baby steps, distancing myself from this Christian faith. And over time, it just felt more appropriate to keep taking those steps forward. Again, we had these conversations about science and spirituality. We cultivated our best friendship. And then as we move forward in 2016, life started to get even better for me because I met my now wife, Antasia. And I'm not going to go into our whole backstory because I think that that's more appropriate for going back and listening to the Going West, Going West, Going Wheat story. And maybe we could revisit it on another personal journey of mine and check in. But I do want to say that she also played an instrumental role in my growth because she is an open book. She's always had an open mind and has always kind of shared the same doubts that I had. And she's someone that I was able to have really deep, vulnerable, personal conversations about my faith with and about my spirituality and things that, besides you, Tall, probably things that I wouldn't be
Mhm.
comfortable bringing up to anyone else.
Yeah.
And some of those things were just really hard to say. I can't stress that enough, travelers. Like, I think for me, like, the first time I said, like, I don't believe in God in the sense of like the Christian faith, like, that was hard for me to admit to myself. But, like, it's something that I needed to get off my chest. Like, I think there were so many. It's funny on like a religious topic. I have to say there were so many confessionals that I had to make to my now wife, and some that I've even made to you as well, Tall, as I've opened up about it. But I think part of getting older and part of seeking my truth meant being more vulnerable, being more vulnerable, owning my mistakes, realizing that like I need to pursue my truth. And as long as I'm again respecting others and I'm staying true to my core values, which my core values now is fighting against misinformation in the scientific community, pursuing truth, pursuing um, enlightenment in my own unique way, and letting myself have room for interpretation in the universe without kind of mixing church and state, no pun intended, or I should say, without mixing um, the unknown with the known. I think that there's clear boundaries there, but I've really found a recipe that works for me. And I wouldn't have been able to get to this point in my journey and create this beautiful ogre stew, if you will, without like the closest people in my life, like Utah and the closest of them all, my wife, Antasia, just helping me get to this point where I was able to self-reflect and have these philosophical, introspective questions and conversations. And I think I needed the think tank to get here. I needed the think tank to reconcile my thoughts, to figure out, like, what did it mean to be spiritual but also be a man of science, and how do I seek this truth, how do I do it constructively? And again, I'm still finding my path. I'm still meandering down this path and finding new things every day, but I'm pretty confident that I know how to guide myself down that path, whereas in the past I had a lot of doubts and I had a lot of missteps and I had a lot of times where I was just wandering, right? Like I was kind of just freely roaming around, didn't know where I was going, bumping into trees, and now here I am. Like I've I've got Occam's razor in my back pocket, and I'm going through the forest, and I know exactly like the truth that I'm looking for, and I know where I want to get it and how I want to pursue it. But I'm also keeping that open mind that things could change. New developments are happening all the time in my life, my personal journey in the world of science, and I think that, like I said, that's been alluring to me. I think for me, science especially has been addicting because it's been a way, and you can relate to this too, Tal, because we've had lots of conversations about it. Science is like the God that I always wanted. Science is like the ultimate form of truth, the virtually indisputable truth, the, the language of the universe that is laws of physics and mathematics and these things that speak to us and that I think have spiritual meanings intrinsically because again, it's almost like reading the code of the universe, whether this is a simulation or not, right? Like it's just I think there's something beautiful in understanding the universe for what it really is and not being ignorant to it. So I guess I'll pretty much start to wrap up with that. That you were really a big part of that, and that's kind of where I've gotten to in my journey in the last 10 years is just growing in that way.
Well, really look forward to the next conversation we're going to be having on this because I get to challenge some of your direct beliefs now. I wanted to really make sure I gave you the space to talk about your past, and I know I got a little jonesy on this episode more so than the last because we're getting to a point now where I can actually really start directing on what these mean things mean to you now. And I think that at least as long as you'll have me, keep letting me interview you about yourself. I think I have a few more questions for the traveler of how you got to where you're at right now. And I want to really understand what you mean by some of these things because as your friend who goes through these things with you and everything like that, I think that I take for granted some of the words you say. And I think sometimes I assume some of the things you're talking about, right? Because of the shared language that we have. And I think this really challenges me to listen to you in a different way and to really actually be like, well, no, what do you define these things as? And where you're at now in your deconstruction is something that I am so fucking proud of and who you are and your identity and honestly, the man you've become. And the type of man that's been able to support me in not becoming a man, quite honestly, right? And I want to be able to, thank you, be able to really understand. You talked about so many beautiful things with Antasia, with myself, and solid science is your God, and the language of the universe and spirituality. And I really want to understand some of these more intrinsic mechanisms for you as we continue down this descent. So thank you for, once again, be continuing to create a vulnerable space with me here today. Traveler, once again, I want to acknowledge Jared for him just being able to come here in his space and on a random Monday night in the middle of 5 years later flashbacks, we're able to have a laugh and a chuckle when our team loses horribly to the evil empire. And once again, continue to show up. And once again, Traveler, thank you for so much for joining us here today, wherever you might be at in your journey, wherever book you're taking off the shelves, wherever staircase you are descending down. Thank you for making this your time and space with us. We hope that whatever you are, whether you're anthropogenic or not, you're welcome to come on the show if you're not anthropogenic, especially. We don't want to be biased, but if we could have a non-anthropogenic person join us, that'd be pretty dope. You're welcome to come on the Cup of Tea show too, I'm pretty sure as well. So
of course.
Yeah, and open invitation. If you can contact us in any meaningful way, that'd be super dope. Not sure how to do that, but we'll figure it out. Other than that,
let's communicate with the language of the universe.
Jared, that's why you're here, buddy. I need you to crack these codes for me. But other than that, Traveler, as always, you are loved and you are enough.